Start with this. Welcome everybody to the PFLA Pastured Pigs webinar. First one, as you may or may not have gathered, with Zoom webinars, for those of you that have done Zoom meetings and are used to seeing everybody, with a Zoom webinar, we can't see you. So you please don't fall asleep, but we won't notice if you do. So I'm Anna Heaton. I am part of the Standards and Certification Committee for the Pasture-fed Livestock Association and involved with developing the Pasture for Life standards. Obviously, our standards are for ruminants, so they don't cover pigs, but we have a lot of interest in how pigs can be integrated into farming systems while minimising the amount of grains or imported feed and maximising the amount of soya. So today we have, and now my screen is going to have a bit of a fit. There we are. Sorry, no, gone too fast. We're going to have talks from 3 different farmers who are all maximising the use of forage and pasture for pigs, but doing slightly different things. So it'll give you some different overviews, and with for whom the pig part of their enterprise is slightly different in terms of how much it is of each enterprise. And what we're going to do, we're going to have each of the presentations in turn. The middle presentation is going to be live from a field in Herefordshire, so you might just have to bear with us while we work out the technology for that, but it all seems to be looking like it's set up correctly. And we'll do question and answer at the end. Now, as part of the Zoom function, there is a Q&A box that you should be able to see, and you can type questions into this box and we'll then deal with those at the end. Depending on how many questions we get, we'll endeavour to answer as much as we can. If there are things that are outstanding, we can always provide some follow-up after the webinar. And the other thing just to mention is that the aim of this webinar is a sort of introduction to managing pigs on pasture and maximising the use of forage. If there's a lot of interest and people want to get more detail, this is something that PFLA could hold future webinars on as well. So please feel free to type comments into the Q&A as well, just so that we can understand what's helpful for you and what we might be able to do in future. Okay, so I'm going to now move into the speakers. I'm just going to do a very brief introduction to Fred at Gothelney farm. So it's just some basics to the farm. It's a family farm, 250 acres that are owned plus 150 acres on FBT. It's a non-organic farm, and there've been pigs for the last 10 years, though there's quite a history of keeping pigs on this farm, as Fred's grandfather had indoor rather than outdoor and pasture-based pigs up until the 1980s. Main enterprises on the farm are cereals sold directly to bakers, and the pigs that are sold by for charcuterie restaurants and meat boxes. And pigs on this farm are the main enterprise by about 2 to 1. So I'm going to hand over to Fred now. So off you go. Tell us a bit more.
Hey everyone, I'm going to imagine you're all there, and then we'll fly with it. I'm Fred. You may or may not know me. I don't know who you are. I farm down in Bridgewater in Somerset. I'm about an hour south of Bristol. I guess Anna's kind of covered what the farm looks like really nicely there. I guess before I get into the specifics, I would just give you a kind of bit of context as to where the pig enterprise came from, where it sits on the whole farm. And that's this idea that I've been farming for 10, probably 12 years now. And I guess my ambition is to kind of create a farm, or have a farm where everything's in balance, and all the different aspects are complementing each other, and the system works really neatly. The first few years when I was farming, I really felt we were kind of bullying the farm into submission, trying to produce these cheap commodities. I guess we're trying to move to a different mindset where we're always thinking about how we earn the right to grow a crop and produce good food. And with that in mind, earning the right, for me, there's 2 like big levers that I've kind of moved our farm towards more kind of regenerative agroecological view, and those are lays in the system and cover crops, and so with the pig system, it was an opportunity to work those, to create a farm gate product for those two aspects of our rotation, and kind of when I'm talking about the specifics, the reason it looks like it does is because I've reverse engineered it with that in mind. I guess thinking back to how my first few years on the farm, it's such a big change in mentality because I was so heavily focused on yield. And the reason I was focused on yield was because I didn't have control of my price. Whereas now we start by asking, how do I want to grow this? Why do I want to grow it like that? Why should I grow it like that? And then we work backwards rather than starting from the point of view of how much do we need to grow and then working forwards. And with all the kind of negative externalities of a production system like that. And you know, we were that conventional system on steroids 8-9 years ago. So the pigs have been transformative. I think in my head when I started, I thought it was going to be an arable rotation with pigs, and now it's a pig rotation with arable. So the specifics, we have only 30 sows, we wean at 8 weeks, and we actually have relatively low kind of litter sizes, between 6.5 and 7.3 weaned alive. We wean at 8 weeks. And that means we're producing about 400, 450 a year. This is purebred Tamworth. And we're finishing at about 85 kilos dead weight, which for us is probably towards 10 months old. And the sows are split into 3 groups. So 3 groups of 10, and they're on a 6-month cycle. So basically every 2 months we're weaning about 60-ish and finishing about 60-ish. And there are 2 kind of parts of the system. All of the breeding and all of the growing up to about 6 to 8 months old is done outdoors. And then for 2 to 4 months at the end, so sort of if it's December, it might be near 6 months old, but at this time of year, it'll be just the final 2 months of a pig's life. We finish them in a roundhouse on a straw-based system. And the 2 diets that we use are, if I start with the roundhouse, it's a TMR diet. So it's about, well done, that's great. So that is basically a bale of lucerne grass silage, which is about a ton, and then 300 kilos of rolled barley, which is homegrown, and about 150 kilos of rolled either peas or beans, also grown on the farm, which basically makes it about a 70% forage-based ration, 20% cereals, 10% pulses. And in all of the whole production system, because we're trying to get grass into the rotation, actually it kind of really nicely sits with the pig's nutritional requirements, because one of the reasons we're so, as an industry, reliant on imported soy is because you can't go higher theoretically than 15% on pulses in the diet, because they've got anti-nutritional properties. So if you're starting with 70% of your diet being forage, whether that's grazed at pasture or in a TMR, and that forage is 18 to 20%, you don't need to go anywhere near 15% on your beans or your peas. So it all kind of like sits in together nicely. So if that's the TMR diet that we feed in the roundhouse, the rest of the year is split into 2, obviously. In the grazing season here, I would say April to September inclusive. And during that time, all the pigs are on herbal lays, probably like 20, 25 way mixes. And that's a great example of how we're trying to take you guys doing mob grazing as a bit of a kind of, we're nowhere near it, but we're more dynamic than we were, and we're way more dynamic than any other pig system in kind of a commercial sense I've seen. And that is basically grazed for 21 days. Then we've moved over to the right-hand side. We'll graze that for 21 days. Then we've got a third paddock, and then we'll go back to the first one. So we're looking at like a 40-45 day rest period. And that's how we operate during the grazing season. And it's the same whether we're running like a mob of growers or whether we're running the group of sows. And we're basically assuming, and we have to make a judgment call on this, that they're getting up to 70 to 80% of their diet from forage. And then we top up with a straight 2-to-1 barley beans mix in the same principle as the TMR ration, which is there, yeah. So everything's grown on farm, which is really nice. It's a super low cost system. And although there are plenty of arable crops going into the pig, the farm gate price is the pig. And that's kind of the big change. There's a kind of biological undertone to what we're doing, and the whole mindset has shifted on how we're farming. But there's also that economic side, because if you're still trying to produce a cheap commodity, there's a limit as to how kind of aspirational you can be with your cropping system. So the pigs really have transformed the whole business. And as Anna said, we actually kind of weirdly we took on 150 acres right next door on a 5-year business tenancy from this September. And the reason I say weirdly is because, 7 or 8 years ago, the whole mentality was get bigger, vertically integrate, economies of scale. And one of the reasons we were forced to kind of reorientate, because I was 10, 20 years behind everyone else, and I'm right next to an AD plant, and the rents are hideous. And all of a sudden, people like, having gone this other way, we're now in a position where we can have this really brilliant rotation of 3 years of grass and 2 years of cereal crops, and we can compete with this kind of other model, and with none of the negatives. Anyway, I'll probably leave it to questions, but hopefully is that okay, Anna?
Yeah, if the cover crops, perhaps because you said the herbal lays, you've got a very diverse mix there. What's the difference?
Yeah. So it's exactly the same principle in what we're trying to achieve in terms of the cover crops versus the lays. So between October and February, March, the pigs are just too destructive, and we're trying to keep the lays for 3 years. So we take them off the lays and put them on cover crops. And the cover crops, again, diversity is a big rule for us. It depends on seed pricing and availability, but that mix there would probably have 15 to 20 different things in, and a good range of like warm season, cool season, cereals, legumes, brassicas, and we mix depending on when it was going in the year. What I try and do is have a cover crop that we sow early. So a field or two which actually don't grow an arable crop during the rotational year. And that means that as soon as we get to September, we've got that kind of biomass, 2 or 3 foot high, and we haven't got to wait for another 2 months to get good fodder quality. But the principles are exactly the same. We're trying to manage them to get that 70%. That's the kind of magic number in my head of forage into the diet, because we need to. Because our homegrown 2-to-1 barley beans mix, we can't feed as a complete diet.
Right, that's brilliant. And I suppose one sort of almost sort of going back to basics. Why did you pick the Tamworth for your breed?
I think the Tamworth, any rare breed. I think I was after slow growth and hardiness. I think sometimes people can tell you a good marketing story about this breed or that breed, but that's all it is at the end of the day. It's a nice story. I think the key difference to our system is that it's the slow growth, and that's where the flavour comes from. And we have to be producing something that is differentiable at the end of the equation.
Great. Thanks, Fred. That's a really nice sort of starting point for us there. As I say, there'll be a chance to ask some more questions later on. I'm going to stop sharing this screen now and hand over to Russ and Simon somewhere in a field in Herefordshire. So bear with us if the screen goes blank for a minute, but let's just see if we can affect that.
Can you see us and hear us?
I can see you, but only in a small box rather than as a screen share.
Okay, that might be your own settings, but
okay.
Hopefully everyone can see.
If anybody watching can, if if it's anybody, if you can't see a little video of, I think these are the coonies, are they?
That's right, yeah.
Of pigs in a field. Can you please put it in the chat box quickly now, just so that we can make sure we have got people watching? But
Great. Here's Simon, over to you.
I found what Fred has done really, really interesting and sort of inspirational to some extent, because I would have started off 35 years ago with pigs, and probably like him, my family had pigs on a small holding thing. And then in those days, there was very little what we would call good pork around. So I had about 40 sows. I would grow 10 acres of fodder beet and produce pigs. We would direct sell to customers, probably 10 or 12 pigs a week. And then as more people kept rare breed pigs and the market was more competitive, we just keep enough sows now that we probably only sell 2 pigs a week now, compared to 1.5 beef animals, probably 12 lambs. So I keep enough pigs just to keep us going in pigs. But I think now, with the opportunity for the demand for pigs, pastured pigs and soya-free pigs and everything, I'm gonna get back and keep more sows. And but I wanted to show you this because somebody said on the forum the other day that coonies do well on pasture. The trouble is, pasture doesn't do well on coonies, and these been out here all winter. Well, with 5 of their mates, and they've trashed a lot. So we're feeding them sugar beet, and these will be destined. There'll be absolutely no meat in these. These will just be solid little balls of fat, and we'll render that down to lard. Now we'll wander over to the copper pigs, and I keep pedigree Hampshire pigs. I'd seen the thing in America in the hog belt, where they were just throwing all sorts of agricultural produce at these Hampshires, and they seem to be able to turn any waste product into meat. They'd also be a marbled meat, and I've stuck with them probably now 30 years, Hampshires. It's really struggling at the moment to find another Hampshire boar. So this piece of there's a 4-acre patch of miscanthus grass here they live in all winter. But they're just a bit hot for them today to come and show themselves off. That's what I'll do for a bit of bread. So we are basically feeding anything. This is the only part of the farm that's non-organic, and it allows us to feed any sort of waste products that the local farmers have: potatoes, strawberries, raspberries, pumpkins, artichokes, you name it. They just come and tip it here. And I also get waste from some of the junk food projects. So when the bread and the fruit that the junk food people can't use, I bring back and feed it to the ear. And they literally would use anything. These Hampshire sows, they've missed one cycle due to an infertile boar, but they've lived out here all winter with no hard feed at all. They've just lived in the miscanthus. They even made a bed in the miscanthus when it was wet. They made their own little bed, and they're as happy as Larry, happy as a pig in whatever. But they do destroy is the problem. So as soon as we grow a high, some clover lays or lucerne lays or whatever, they would just crush it. I have tried using a single step forage harvester and hauling it to them. That was when we had more people around the farm. I think that's the way I'm going to go. I'm going to build special buildings that we can direct cut the forage and take it to the pigs, rather than going out and absolutely wrecking everything. So I gave them this patch this time last. We had to resow it. And this acre and a half probably, it probably took 6 days for them to be go from green to brown. They trashed everything and didn't utilize it at all. And there was 80 tons of apples, all with the supermarket stickers tipped at the top, all for free. So it's a good, there's absolutely so much potential in pigs. Like, I'd be guilty at having it, of them being an afterthought on the farm, rather than like Fred, where they've now become quite a significant part of the farm. And I think my next part of my journey is to get the pigs, whether or not I can breed a non-rooting pig or select against rooting or something, I don't know, but that'll be my plan for the next 10 years or so.
Show anything else up there?
Sorry?
I think we're about done.
They're all hidden.
They're all in the shade.
Pictures taking.
I think we're done, Anna, if you want to take it back.
Okay, bear with me, folks.
Hopefully that all worked.
Thing is, yeah, they don't need anything necessarily milled. These will eat whole corn, whole peas. I think you can feed, later in the summer, I'm going to be feeding 100% peas. Forget about what college said about 15 or 20%. I know for a fact they'll do well on 100% peas, and the peas don't get wasted in the mud. So just at the moment, feeding all sugar beet, they are getting too fat and not enough lean. They'll go in the pond, they'll go in, wallow, they'll go for a swim now and again.
Right, I'm going to take this back, but Simon, if you can still just be, if you might just, if I can just do a couple of quick follow-up questions, if you're still there.
Fences, they're forever rooting mud onto the bottom strand of the fence and escaping.
There's quite a few questions from people about are you nose ringing sows or not? I mean, that is obviously one of the.
No, I don't. I can't abide the ringing. I think that's just totally cruel and should be totally banned.
It is from an animal welfare perspective. It's the point, if you like, what a pig wants to do is root. Yeah. And so stopping it rooting is a frustration, but I understand why people are asking the question in terms of.
They have a very sensitive nose, and it seems an awful. I did get so far along inventing a more humane device, perhaps, to stop them rooting. But yeah, that was when I was at college in 1970s, and I haven't gone far with that either.
And the Cooney, as you said, it's one of the ones I would have to say, if people say to me, what breed do you want? And people say, I'd like Coonies, they really do go to fat, but you're using that. You have a market for that fat and lard. Is that correct?
There's a tremendous market for, yeah, proper lard and proper, but again, grown without soya and the whole package, yeah. So dripping now is called tallow. It is very trendy, and the pig fat is lard. There honestly will be only tiny flecks of meat throughout the fat.
Yes, no, that's it is an interesting one, because I think again it's sometimes seen as a good sort of not a smallholders type pig, but I think you have to identify your end market, which you obviously have done. But as you say, it's fat with a small amount of meat rather than meat with some fat.
And they're endearing for people to come and see, and they're very friendly, and they're a super little pig. They're just not meat producers. And we did one of the previous ones grazed without digging up too much. For this lot, we've really gone to town.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. That's brilliant, Simon. Again, I know there's more questions. I just thought I'd ask the question about ringing. While you were there in the field looking at the results of pigs rooting.
If we did a little video of holding a pig by its nose whilst you put the rings in, that would answer all their questions in 5 seconds, wouldn't it?
Yeah, the noise as well, I think would.
Yeah, the noise and everything, yeah.
Great, thanks, Simon. Yeah, so Simon will still be here, and I say we'll go through some questions at the end. So I'm going to move on now to do a very basic farm intro to Jonny and Rachael Ryder at Horton House Farm, and this is quite a long-standing family farm, a tenanted farm with 500 hectares. Certified organic and pasture for life on the ruminant livestock, and pigs have been quite a long-standing enterprise as well. But as you can see from the list here, there's a lot going on. There's dairy, beef and veal, sheep, laying hens, and Rachael told me they've just got goats as well. So there's definitely lots of things happening with this farm. And the main markets for pigs are sort of weaner sales to an organic farm, and obviously then going to farm drop. So I presume that'll be pork. But I'll hand over to Jonny now, who's going to tell us a bit more, and perhaps you can explain a bit more about your markets and your pig system, Jonny. Okay.
Okay. Hello. Yeah, I'll just give you a quick outline. I'm much better than saying what we're doing, but yeah, I think pigs probably for us are even more of a side enterprise than Simon, and cows are very much our thing. But the pigs, we've always had them. I've had a sister since I was a small boy, and we had to keep them as a viable enterprise that we paid for the feed and had money back for what we produced. So the basic was to use the waste on the farm and provide food for us, and also showing was quite a big thing for us. And we're passionate about the Tamworth breed and passionate about maintaining it. And we really feel that the pasture thing utilises all the attributes fully, and a great way of trying to maintain it. So I think we've always had the amount of grass summer, and but I think really prompted from our organic inspector, Jason Gale, describing a pasture pig enterprise in South Africa, and also opening up for markets for the meat. So having too many for a hobby, we've sort of really tried a proper pig enterprise that can sort of stand alone in the future if necessary. But I think basically, like I think we do on the farm, it's very different, and always had to sort of observe things. So I suppose mainly everything we're doing with the pig is sort of observing and notifying we've had and things upon. But I suppose the main driver for us really financially is that grazed grass is 1/10 the price of organic pig feed, and that's huge really, and that's so given the confidence to move away from sort of trying to maximise growth rates and everything like that. We just want to have as long as a pig is viable and healthy and functioning well, we don't need to worry about huge growth rates, because the price differential is so huge. And the other thing we noticed really alongside the cows is that the pigs just love being with the cows. They love being in the yard in the winter. They sleep with the cows. They root around the straw and amongst the straw bales. They're a nightmare when we bed up there. There's piglets buried in the straw. They're everywhere, and they just love it. And the cows seem to be more than happy to have them there. And also in the pasture, we're together with the pigs, especially when the calves. Pigs clear up behind the calves, and they sort of sanitise the pasture. So it's absolutely ideal in that they root out weeds and clear up other weeds and spread the dung about as well. And we do it. I don't like having pigs inside particularly. I find a lot of feeding of that amount with no particular equipment, hard work, and taking a lot of time, and the pigs always seem to be stressed inside. It's stressful for us. Pigs out grazing, they're just a completely different animal, and it's something to behold when they're out of pasture, getting feed, they're just totally content. They come up to you, but not for food. They don't grizzle. They just express all completely different types of behaviour, and also the results of quite opposite to what we would have expected in quite a lot of things. So sort of a rundown of what we do. All the pigs in the summer, And the cows and the dry sows, sorry, not cows, 4 to 5 months plus, are just on pasture alone with nothing else, but good clover pasture, and often with the cows and calves. The finishing pigs get grass and cow's milk to top it up, and the young pigs get grass, sprouted oats and some cow's milk as well, anything under 4 to 5 months. And the lactating sows will get milk and sprouted oats. Last year we tried lucerne and milk mix to give to the lactating sows, which seemed to work well, but there had to be a lot of milk in it to make it palatable. And it's hard work to get to the pigs, there's a lot of mess of work to get it out to the sows. So then this winter we moved to sprouted oats and beans that worked pretty well, but again we got through quite a lot of quantities. There was quite a lot of sprouting to do, and the first batch worked really well, but the second batch, the beans weren't such good quality and something in sprouting, so we'd have to be aware of that, and maybe we're moving from things to feeding more clover haylage in the winter to go with the sprouting, so perhaps cheapen the ration and be easier to feed out. Pigs are all housed in the cow yards in the winter, but all the young pigs can roam around the whole of the dairy and the dairy paddocks. So quite often in the winter, if you drive around the road, you'll see piglets everywhere in amongst all the paddocks, the hedges, and rooting round, but not to a detrimental effect, just the little rooting areas. And I think the villagers are just quite used to seeing pigs crossing the road and moving about, and no one seems to worry. But they all. The surprising result really has been that litter size has increased since we've done this. We've probably averaged six piglets a litter. Now this last 10 litters have been 8.8 piglets a litter, which for Tamworth is pretty good, and 3 or 4 of those are first timers as well. Feed costs reduced remarkably. Eating quality has gone up, and work, so especially this time of year, at the moment is very limited walking about, and that, so overall it's been a really good experience, and we just feel it's securing the future of the Tamworth breed. The 2 biggest breeders there are up against 3 to 4 litter sizes, astronomical feed costs, and astronomics, and both considering getting out of the Tamworth pig, and just feel that the breed isn't being used. So I think that's probably about all. We use them also in the spring and winter. We'll put the pigs, the pastures we want reseeding, and they'll plough up the pastures. 7 pigs will plough up a 4-acre field in no time, a couple of weeks. So we use them to do that, and then subsoil that ground, and then the following seed crop, and it works brilliant. Contractors don't like it particularly, but it works a treat. Yeah. Okay, so that's probably all a rough outline of what we're doing. So some of the ones you can see there, we put out in this pasture 3 to 4 weeks ago, and yeah, if anything, they've kept growing, they've maintained good condition, and I'll go out there, walk around the cows, move the fence to the cows, and the pigs will just come up and sniff my boots and walk away again. They're in no way they're after. My son used to be feeding them for a month before they went down, and they won't come up to him for feed either. They're just totally content. That's a 10-acre field, and there's 10 of them that size. Old sow, we've got in there who's barren, but she's a nurse sow, so shows them the ropes, where to wallow, where to go and keep, and I think just keeps them quite content and calm. So it works really well. Okay. I think that's about it, yes.
That's great, thanks Jonny. Your internet connection is a little bit shaky, but I hope everybody's got the gist of that. But I know there's people been typing into the Q&A box, so we can always come back to you with questions. I think having heard the 3 of you, I think one of the things, if anybody's used to sort of the kind of sort of commercial pig numbers and expectations, I think one of the things you would say is sort of reset your expectations. You need to think about these kind of enterprises in you know, the standard figures for pig keeping, and in fact, as Simon pointed out, some of the standard advice on what you can feed pigs doesn't always work, or isn't always the case when you're offering these kinds of mixed crops and pastures as part of the diet, rather than the pig eating solely what you put in front of it. There's one comment I just wanted to pull up here, but we've got, I'm just going to go, one of our people listening is Mike Gooding, who was at FAI, which is farm, did a huge amount of, well, still is doing a lot of research near Oxfordshire, and looking at different systems of managing. And one of the points that he made is there are huge animal welfare benefits to these forage-based systems. One of the challenges, I mean, this photo really sort of illustrates it quite nicely, because we've got these pigs' back ends, and of course they've got their long tails, and one of the issues for indoor raising is tail biting. And Mike wanted to point out that you just don't get these kind of issues in these kind of systems because the pigs have enough stimulus from their environment. And he also wanted to point out that there is a known issue in pigs on commercial rations of ulceration within the gut. And there is, this just again doesn't seem to occur with these slower grown forage-based pigs, and it's sort of the way that they're growing, as well as less medication, less pain and stress, is thought to contribute to this this less ulceration. So the point Mike wanted to make was not only are you reducing the cost of producing pigs by maximising the use of forage, but there's also these massive animal welfare benefits as well. So thanks for that comment, Mike. That's always helpful. I would say I've put here, and as I say, this webinar is being recorded by PFLA and will be available on YouTube. I have put a few sort of links and examples here. The fact that some of these, in fact several of these, are for organic pigs, don't feel that means you have to be organic to use them. I think it really is just the fact that some of the people with organic pigs were some of the people who started thinking about how they, you know, because with organic standards the pigs had to be outdoors, is how do you maximise the use of the alternative feeds, particularly as organic pig feed is incredibly expensive. So there's been a number of studies and pieces of research that have got some really useful information. So I've put these up, and as I say, you'll be able to find these links afterwards. The other one I would say that I think is a useful source of information is some of the older pig keeping books from sort of the turn of the century. You know, I've got some going back to sort of 1850, and the method that these guys are using now of having pigs outside, and going back to what Fred was doing with planting these incredibly diverse mixes of crops. This is really what people were doing to fatten pigs. So again, it's sometimes almost, it's not saying we need to completely go back to that stage, but there's quite often in some of those, if you pick up the books in second-hand bookshops, then there's some quite interesting options for mixes that can be grown, right down to nutritional analysis of acorns and how that might fit into the diet. So I just sort of put some of these up as a bit of information as well. But we're going to go into the Q&A now and just see where we go. So we did sort of talk about rooting and digging and nose ringing, but I don't think any of you guys are using nose ringing, and in fact it sounds like you're using the pig as a tool within your rotation as much as anything else. But there was one question specifically for you, Fred, which was when you have the cover crop, after the pigs come off the cover crop, what do you do next? How do you manage that crop to sort of bring it back into your rotation? And how long do you wait after the pigs have come off before you do whatever you do?
So it depends when we're pulling them off the cover crop. So they might, for example, go on the first mixture of cover crop for October and early November, before they go on to another crop with slightly different mix, a bit more winter hardy, and it's been planted a bit later, and then they'll come off another one and work their way round. So in mid-November, we might take a view. If the weather's nice, we'll put a winter cereal in behind it. If not, it'll be going into spring cropping, and we're a plough-based system because we're trying to minimise, or in fact not use any synthetics at all, and the ploughs are a really useful and important tool in our system.
No, that's great, thank you. That's just and then another, actually, again, which I think any of you can perhaps answer, but Fred, seeing as you're here at the moment, we'll carry on. But how about, again, I suppose this does come back to it, with, you mentioned that you wanted to keep the herbal lays for 3 years, around 3 years, I think that was correct. So is it difficult to manage the pigs to stop them causing so much, too much damage, so that you get that length of time on the lay?
Honestly, no. I think when people say pigs are destroying my lay, I mean, what have they put in front of these pigs? Because I've put in front an expensive, beautifully nutritious 20-way mix of grasses, legumes, forbs, and I'm moving them and managing them as a shepherd or a herdsman would, right? And they don't. I mean, yes, there are areas, sometimes they track along fence lines. If you fence the electric nearest the hedge, the soil's always better there, there's more worms, and they'll work their way along, or a shady corner to keep cool. But we've got lays on the farm that we're into the 3rd year of using them, and it's perfectly manageable. But the critical thing is you use them in the grazing season, because I think this is something I found in the first year. We tried to keep pigs right through the winter on the herbal lays, and it's really weird, but the seasonality comes into play. But generally speaking, like mid-October, November, the perennials kind of shut down and must put their sugars or put their resources back into their roots or something, or at least there's less nutrition on top, and the pigs seem to sense this. And overnight, an area that would have lasted them 3 weeks without rooting, they'll just change their behaviour and they'll start rooting. So it's absolutely critical to know when that window is, and that's why we use them in the cover crops. And I think also we shouldn't be too obsessed about trying to engineer a way out of this behaviour. I mean, a pig's natural instinctive behaviour is to root, but it's also to graze. So, I mean, let's not kind of like try and park rooting and forget about it. Just embrace it and manage it within your system.
Great, thank you, Fred. That's really helpful. Jonny, I'm hoping your system is going to, if you can come off mute. Just a question about using milk as part of the diet, and sort of concerns about how much milk can be fed before pigs start to get fat. But are you feeling that, what sort of volumes are you giving the pigs? What have you got, I suppose it'll be?
This year, the cows, I don't know why, but we haven't had as much colostrum, so they've had about the right level and they've stayed about a sensible level. But you could feed them loads of milk, and sometimes we have added a milk and they'll just balloon. They'll just get fatter and fatter and fatter. We've had bacon just been all fat on the surface, so they get like the cuties, really. They get huge. Can manage the levels of milk, and they. Especially if you give some forage too, they seem quite happy just to be on less, so they'll, in March when we're calving, they'll be in the yards and they'll have a trough, and we'll fill it up with milk, and we'll try and just prioritise the lactating sows with more, and then just give different amounts. But one thing you have to be really careful with is that we did actually one year have the first batch of colostrum we used was really, really rich, and the pigs had salt poisoning from that. So we had to actually dilute. We have to be careful to put some water with it now as well. So you must be really careful with rich colostrum, or they'll get too much salt and they go legs, and we did lose one, and they flew badly because they were distressed. But that was a one-off event we've never ever had before. But you do need to be a little bit careful. But it's brilliant when they come in for the grass to add a bit of condition before you send them off. It's absolutely brilliant for that. And antibiotic free, so there's no worries about antibiotics in the milk. We just tend to use the colostrum milk at the end of the line of milking. That was a bit of a crossover when you put the washer and there might be a bit of water through it, or it might be a bit dirty, then you'd like to go in the bulk tank. So that's what it is to go, but we might have the goat milk as well to add to that as well. So yeah, but it's a really useful tool for us. Yeah, but you do have to be careful.
So when you say you fill it, have you got any idea of sort of how much per pig, if you've got a lactating sow, how much milk roughly would you like to be feeding her a day, even if it's, have you got any, or really is it just what you've got, you split between them?
It's just what we've got, we split, but I guess I think they'll drink 20 litres easily a day, more probably if you fed them twice a day. They really will drink a lot, but they do seem incredibly content on it. We try and give them other fibre as well. But but it's really now they're out at pasture and they're coming back to get a bit of milk, and the lactating sows, some of them are getting it now as well. They'll drink and drink. Not getting more. Yeah.
And I
really good before you're sharing them as well.
Thanks, Joy. Sorry, your sound is not fabulous, and much as it's great having the video, you might, I don't know whether if you try stopping your video, don't jump off, but whether that will improve the sound. Try it and see. I think it's
okay. Is that better?
That might be marginally better.
We've just got really bad connection here.
It's
okay.
rural broadband. It's fine, Jonny. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. I'm going to go to Simon, though this could technically be a question for any of you, but it was a question about the fact that, again, if you look at sort of commercial pigs, a lot of abattoirs will reject entire males, non-castrated males, if they're more than sort of 5 or 6 months old because of boar taint. And the comment was made that it didn't look like any of you guys were castrating. So, Simon, I wonder if you could tell us your view on that.
Yeah, I think foot and mouth taught me a lot about boar taint, in that obviously we were stuck not being able to sell anything for months and months and months, and we did get it. And previously I'd always been sure that diet and boar taint went together, and since we've been doing our sort of diets, I've never ever had a case of boar taint except during that foot and mouth period, where the boars probably got to, I don't know, 8 or 9 months old before we could shift them. So we did then, but no, I've never needed to castrate. I've never needed to chop teeth. I've never needed to cut the tails. It's just, I've never needed to inject iron, ever. And if like we said, in college, we were told they'd all die if we didn't give them iron. And if we gave them oats, it would upset their tummies, and it's all bunkum. The pig is so adaptable that at turning in waste and getting nutrition from waste, or what we call waste products, it's you don't need to do any of these things. And these sows probably eating 40 or sort of 25 kilos of sugar beet a day each, instead of getting like 2 kilos of, an intensive sow would be fed once in the morning, probably 2 and a bit kilos of cake, and then nothing for the rest of the day. And these are munching 25 kilos of sugar beet down. It's got to be so much better, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, that's great. And what's, I'm going to come back with this with everybody, but just again, as you're here, just a question about soil type. What soil type are you on, or what are you trying to put your pigs on?
Well, we are pretty sandy, and just Russ and I just talking now about the rooting, is probably because we're all getting our soils in so much better heart and with so much better life in our soils, the pigs are switched onto it. And you know, the pigs need, or traditional bred pigs need a lot of lysine, amino acid, whereas the modern intensive pig needs a lot of methionine. Well, under our soils, under the grass layer, is just a huge resource of lysine for the pigs, and they're probably, it's probably good that they go and harvest it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very useful point as well, Simon. The fact that that lysine is the sort of the essential amino acid for pigs, and that's one of the things that, if they're, I would imagine your pigs ranging and foraging, as you say, are accessing that for themselves. But it is one of the challenges sometimes with when you start, if you buy bagged pig feed, it will have all of these essential amino acids and vitamins and minerals balanced, and obviously you're letting the pig go out into the farm and find those things. But it is something to have in the back of your mind, that these essentials are required in the diet.
Yeah, and methionine is just awful. It changes the behavior. It makes them grow fast and grow lean, but it makes them aggressive and tail bite, and just by feeding too much of the wrong stuff changes the whole behavior of the pig.
And if you, I mean, again, this is a general question for any of you guys, but one question was about the value of pasture when it comes to both the flavour of the meat, whether you have any opinion on the differences there, but also whether anybody's done any work on the nutritional value of the meat on these pasture-fed pigs. And any of you, feel free to chip in on that one.
No, we haven't. All our customers are very pleased with our pork, and that's good enough for us.
Yeah. Fred, have you looked at that at all? Looked at I suppose flavour again, because you're selling direct to restaurateurs and charcuteries, so that's going to be a sort of a key thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is only anecdotal, but our meat is a very, very dark red colour. Sometimes you kind of have to second guess it when you're looking in the freezer, what you're pulling out. The other thing I would say is, because of the kind of diet that we're feeding and the length of time we're allowing the pig to mature, we're actually able to hang our pigs for 5 or 6 weeks before we butcher them. So we kill them and then we hang them anywhere between 4 and 6 weeks. And so the diet composition is absolutely critical to being able to hang them that long, I would say. And the hanging is also something that really transforms the eating flavour and the kind of texture. It's a lot more tender. And the chefs in the 2 restaurants in London that we supply, they had the tough job of, they decided they were going to cook a chop every Friday for a year and score it against different criteria, things like marbling, colour, eating, and etc. And basically, there were a couple of, at the end of the year, they gave them this big thing and there was a couple of anomalies. And I guarantee the kind of negative anomalies on this chart were where we hadn't quite balanced supply and demand, and they'd had a pig that hadn't been aged for longer than 2 weeks. So that's something to think about. You know, how you grow it also affects how you can process it and take what is a great product to another level. It's not, it's all joined up.
And that's really, and you're quite right as well. It is part of it, and we shouldn't. In fact, somebody has asked a question about slaughter for pigs as well. And so, do you know how yours are killed? Is it head only electric stun, or is that? Do you know what they're doing at the abattoir?
I don't know, shamefully, no.
But I think the fact about how you manage the meat, the carcass afterwards, and again, this is another one of these things, the kind of things they told us at college you couldn't do, that you couldn't hang pigs for that long. So that's again an interesting point there. And what's your soil type, Fred? What sort of land are you on?
We would categorise it as a medium clay loam, but the farm ranges to some pretty light ground. And actually, I would say most farms have quite a variable soil type. One of the things I've, really got a lot out of recently is thinking about how we can use those areas differently in the winter, particularly even within a field where the nap is, where the rock is, where over winter, it changes how you set things up.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Can I just say on meat quality, comparing it to intensive stuff and your methylene produced and oilseed rape stuff, the fat separates from the eye of meat, doesn't it? Have you seen that? Whereas our pastured and slower grown stuff is always the fat and the meat are firmly together, so you can cut it properly. And the intensive pork is just so wet and flabby and horrible, isn't it?
No, yes. I think actually the fat is one of the things that the quality of the fat in terms of, as you say, how it is on the meat, but also the eating quality. I think it's a totally different thing with these kind of pigs. So.
Do you just say a bit about none of us should go near CO2 killing?
Thank you. Yes, so that I think that might have been part of the question that somebody had asked about what was the sort of, and again, a lot of the commercial pigs these days are going through controlled atmosphere stunning, controlled atmosphere killing, which is generally very high concentration carbon dioxide, and there is some concern about the aversiveness of that for the pigs. So that's that.
Do people generally avoid it?
And somebody's made a point about they thought that castration was illegal. It's not illegal in the UK, and you do actually find that some people rearing pigs for butchers still castrate, but it's not permitted by Red Tractor or any of the other farm assurance schemes, so it's generally not done. But just to answer that specific question, it's not illegal. Jonny, there's a couple of questions for you. If hopefully you're So one of the questions was, do the pigs co-graze with the cows, or do they have their own dedicated pasture? And just to recap, because I think that it was breaking up a bit, was that 10 pigs in 10 acres? And is that your sort of normal stocking rate? Those were sort of weaned pigs, I think, weren't they?
They move out of the pasture to another bit, then the pigs will just stay there, but the cows aren't away for long. So we've got 4 groups of pigs, and 3 of them have got cows with them together. They interact together, and 10. That's just how it's worked out. But I think you could probably have more in there. But then towards the end of the season, it's amazing how they're keeping on top of the grass. So you might get more rooting at the end if it was more. But yeah, I think that's a good number. Just coming to the soil type and rooting, we had an interest like Fred. We definitely find overnight they go from grazing perfectly with virtually no rooting, everything overnight. But interestingly, on the established dairy pastures, that was end of September. But we had some land which was conventional arable. We'd planted down to a diverse sward, which was a lot of clover in it, but it was planted as a proper herbal lay, and they didn't root that until the end of November. So maybe there wasn't quite as much underground there, or there was no incentive. So it was quite a 2 months longer we could graze that than the other one. And I put it down to maybe don't have the worms there yet, or just isn't the roots there that they're going for, but something stopping them rooting with that pasture. Yeah. Okay.
No, thank you. That's great. I mean, there's quite a few questions from people about, how much sort of well, aside from soil type, but sort of stocking density, and how much land do you need for each sow and her offspring through to finish. My feeling is, though, please chip in, is this is a bit of a movable feast, with sort of the pun intended, because it really does depend on the time of year and what you've got growing, but perhaps any of you would like to just sort of give some idea for sort of amount of land for a pig enterprise.
I'm sort of building this information as we go, but I can give some numbers that we work to when we're planning the grazing and the area of cover crops we need in the winter. We run about during the grazing season, we run 3 1/4 sows plus followers an acre. That doesn't mean we've got 10 acres, we can put 32 sows on 10 acres and leave it. We pen them smaller and we have rest periods. But I know I need 10 acres to keep them for the whole season. That's what I mean by 3.25 an acre. And in the winter, I bring this right back down to 0.8 sows an acre for the cover crops. And then for growers and finishers, I kind of working it out on a live weight per acre. So in the grazing season, at the moment, we're doing about a tonne per acre, 1,000 kilos an acre. I think realistically, when we get better at managing and being more dynamic with how we move them in the rest periods, and basically learning as we go, I think we could at least double that. But that's where we work to at the moment. And in the winter, we bring that right back down. Last winter, we ran about 270 kilos an acre. And what we're doing in the winter is we're kind of set stocking and strip grazing and just working our way across. Does that make sense?
No, that's great. No, thank you. That's and actually there was somebody did actually ask a question about how you were managing paddocks and perhaps having smaller paddocks and shorter durations, but it sounds like you're already sort of doing a paddock system and moving them, you know, as they graze down a particular area. So yeah, that's great. Thank you. Again, Simon or Jonny, do you want to chip in on sort of stocking dense rough ideas for sort of pigs per acre?
Well, I just think every farm is going to be totally different, and if I was, say, to direct cut lucerne and haul it to the pigs, then my stocking rate would be huge, wouldn't it? But at the moment we are much more near Fred's, you know, around a sow an acre in the miscanthus. They could make a living off that quite comfortably.
Thanks.
But it just depends, you know. Obviously I'm bringing in a lot of waste potatoes and waste sugar beet and all this sort of stuff, so it sort of distorts the figure, doesn't it, on stocking rate?
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky one to say to somebody you definitely need this amount of space without knowing their farm, their soil type, and the crops they're growing. And as you say, with the feed that you have, the waste feed coming in. So that's an interesting one. Thank you. And Jonny, do you want to? I think you said for the young pigs was sort of 10 to the acre. With the sows, what are you doing with the sows?
Well, that's similar, but don't forget that I'm bringing cows in and just grazing the whole paddocks off while they're in there.
Yeah.
So they're not just solely there. So the cows will just come in, but I try and put the quota from the cows off. They'll be grazing one side, and the other side will bring up, and the pigs will graze that. And the pigs tend to go for the half-grown 2 to 4 week grass, and then the cows will be eating the longer grass. There's some mob grazing the longer grass, and then the pigs will nibble on behind what's regrowing behind them. So they do tend to go for the shorter shoots, or definitely the young pigs tend to do that. So, but it's hard to quantify because, you know, the cows. So in that field with the 10 acres with 10 cows, there might be the 50 cows with 3 calves on each cow in there, and they'll be grazing through the whole lot. So it is hard to quantify, but you could definitely keep many more pigs in that field if we were going around and rotating it, loads more. You know, I don't know how many. You could probably have 10 an acre if you were mob grazing it all and going around in a long rotation. Yeah,
that's
definitely. But it's hard to quantify with the cows there.
Yes, so that's a very good point, because you are really truly integrating your pigs into the rest of your enterprise. There was a question about whether your pigs are, do they gravitate back to the farmyards? Have you found it fairly easy to keep them in the fields with the electric fencing, or do you get escapees?
Well, a lot of the fields have got stock neck pigs literally go everywhere, and last year we lost 22 for 3 weeks that were just, we sort of saw them briefly, and they were just eating apples and bits and pieces, but we did manage them back, but it was a bit worrying for a while because they weren't used to any hard feed at all. So eventually they went to the chickens, the travelling chickens, and they started eating a bit of their oats, and then we were able to lure them back with the chicken pen back to the dairy, and they sort of then stayed there, and now we tend to farrow at the dairy, and they're used to that, and they will come back to that, but they will probably cover 100 acres. The young pigs will just move 100 acres from the dairy and just forage through the hedgerows and the fields for that initial period until they're probably 4 to 5 months, and then they can survive in the grass on their own. And also at that stage, they then became a nuisance to people if they're, a little piglet's quite sweet when it's running down the road or passing through someone's garden or something, but they become and they're a nuisance in the dairy, and they knock things over, so then they contain them into the fields. But they do come back, but they do lose some. We lost 2 outside in the way they just disappeared, and so I don't know what happened there, but we do lose. We probably have predation from foxes and things while they're out in paddocks, but not huge numbers, but just the odd one or two. Yeah, but they do come back.
Yes, no, I think that is that's really taking free ranging to the extreme with that one. But yes, I think that's it's an interesting challenge as well once you've got them out. But that's great. There's one question here that I don't know. There's still quite a few questions about nutritional composition of the meat, and I think from the panel we've got here, I think what we say is we don't have any formal research, or we're not aware of any formal research on the different nutritional composition in terms of things like the benefits that you get from pasture-fed ruminants, where you have greater omega-3s and different fatty acid composition. I don't think we know, but that's definitely a point we can take away and just have a look at if there is any literature on that. But unless any of you know anything about that, then I'm afraid, I'm sorry. I know there's lots of people asking that question, but I can't help. And then another one here, which is whether rooting, is that likely to be to the detriment of soil carbon if we have pigs that are rooting and turning over the soil? Which is, I think it's an interesting one, because I think by having the pigs on the land, you are putting a certain amount of organic matter back on. But are we causing ourselves soil problems, or is that really down to good management?
Yeah, I mean the simple answer is yes. Like soil disturbance is bad, right? But if you look at my system, which is what I'm an expert on, if I didn't have pigs in the whole rotation, my system would be entirely dependent on external inputs and synthetics. But we've created, because we've got a livestock unit, the pigs in my case, in our system, we don't have to use anything extra, because we're paying for 3 years of blaze, we're paying for cover crops, we're repairing soil organic matter. And we've just done the first, we soil test every 4 or 5 years before we go back into a new lay. And we've gone from soil organic matter levels, so not organic carbon, but soil organic matter levels. We were sub 3% 5 years ago, and we've gone up to 6.7% in 5 years. So I think it's clearly fine. There's a net positive.
Yeah, that's great. And one other question specifically for you, Fred, about your farrowing sow management. Are you farrowing out on the pastures, or how? Yeah,
all the breeding is outside all year round, pastures or cover crops. Same principle in both. We have 3 groups of sows, 10 in each group. They do everything as a 10. I suppose, yeah, so we just have 10 farrowing arcs. They stay as a 10. We wean them as a 10. We're trying to use AI. We've got a bit of work to do on that, and we run 2 bores as well to kind of tease and sweep. And we try, and the key really for the reason for the 3 groups is the same principle with you mob grazing beef guys and suckler herds. Is the bigger groups you have, the fewer bigger groups, the more easy it is to manage them as a grazing animal, right? So if we had like 1 or 2 sows farrowing every week throughout the year, we couldn't do our system. But if we have 3 groups of 10 sows and we have 3 groups of 70 pigs at 4 months, 6 months and 8 months old, then we can start having some sort of a platform and a plan for the grazing.
Great. No, thank you. That's really helpful. Just sort of picking out a few questions that haven't been answered yet. One is about parasites. Is anybody seeing any issues with parasites, or is the sort of rotation movement of your pigs around the farm resolving that?
Yeah, no, we've never ever wormed pigs. We have no, and they get rid of the lice and things in the mud wallows, don't they? No issues at all with worms.
So you haven't had the because with pigs it's quite often the returns from the abattoir, the sort of milk spot as they call it. And
no, never ever. I think the pig's guts from feeding pasture and silage and all these different things, it's so much more robust than a intensive pig, and no, we've never ever had to worm our pigs.
And Jonny, have you had any? Do you have to worm or do any treatments with the pigs at all?
No, we've never wormed before, so I didn't really know it was an issue. No, I've never wormed or treated at all. So no, can't remember the last time we gave any antibiotics or wormed anything or any problems like that at all. Yeah, totally trouble free in that respect. Yes.
Again, I think there are a lot of overarching positives with this system, and the sort of the pig health. And going back to the point I read out from Mike Gooding earlier about things like not getting gut ulceration in the pigs, and you think there must be some, those kind of good gut health things must be helping. So that's good. One other question: has anybody tried using tree hay for their pigs as a forage source?
No.
No.
they would eat, they would process anything. Once if they're exposed to grass and alternative foods from a piglet onwards, their gut flora must change and adapt, and then they can just cope with anything. Whole maize, I really can't think of it. They don't like Swedes and turnips much, leeks, but everything else they just thrive on.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, and you particularly are aware of that with the different vegetable wastes that you've got coming in. You'll have a whole range of things to put in front of the pigs. Yeah.
I couldn't believe that they ate pumpkins, and they ate all the seeds out first, and then ate the outsides and cleared the lot up. 10 tons of pumpkins.
I think I'm just going to add a point here, because obviously Simon, again, quite a few people previously, not so much necessarily on this webinar, but I know I've had a lot of questions about using waste for pig feed, and obviously traditionally pigs were fed on swill as a food waste. There is a lot of regulation around feeding pigs waste these days, and things like the vegetable wastes that Simon is using aren't so much of a problem, and in fact I think quite a lot of bakery waste is exempt from the regulations, but anything that's coming out of a processing plant or kitchen is absolutely a no-no for feeding to pigs. So if you are interested in or you have access to some kinds of waste, it is just worth checking whether it's something that is okay within the regulations. It's definitely one of those points that pigs as omnivores could be processing a huge amount of waste food that we as humans produce, and other parts of the world have very successful, it's basically a much more managed swill, sort of almost on a regional basis, a collection of waste food, with it all being cooked and prepared to a set level of nutrition. But sadly, within Europe, that kind of thing is still completely forbidden. But as we have been talking about waste, I just wanted to chip that in. I think there's a few questions that we have already dealt with, things like boar taint and castration and points like that. There was somebody did raise the point that because I was saying that castration is not illegal, but obviously for organic certification, then you can't castrate or nose ring your pig. So thank you for raising that, the person who did that. I think that is actually the key questions that were asked have been answered. So do any of you just want to make any sort of closing comments just for people as a takeaway about if they're thinking about either going into pigs with this system, or they have pigs and they want to increase the amount of forage feeding that they do?
Well, I would say just go into it with a totally open mind, because the pig is so adaptable and hardy. It's going to make its own system on your farm rather than try and copy everybody else. You know, you need to look around and see what other farmers have as feed sources, you know, that would otherwise be wasted, and get on with it, because you know they are a brilliant animal.
Thank you, Simon. That's great. Jonny, have you got any final thoughts?
No, just the same, really. Just it's amazing what they can do, and a pig on pasture is something to behold, really. It's just fantastic. Seeing them out in the fields, and especially with the cows and the Tamworth, the ginger against the green grass, it's just amazing. So yeah, no, you can do all sorts, and just keep an open mind, and you know, and anything's possible, really. Definitely try it. Yes.
Great, thank you. And Fred, some closing thoughts.
Well, I agree with what's been said. I don't know. I think the reason I've got on well with pigs is because I had an idea of how they would like help the whole system. Like when you go to a farm and you see everything talking to each other, and it all just seems to make sense, and it seems really simple. It's actually that the farmer has just embraced complexity and is rolling with it. But like to not see pigs as an add-on to your business, but try and work out how they can like really fit into it. And Simon's right, you need an open mind, because the research and stuff isn't out there. You know, you've got to learn and react and keep moving forward, for sure.
Thank you. Well, thank you to all of our panelists. I hope all of you listening have found that an interesting introduction to pastured pigs. And thank you all very much for joining us. And please keep an eye out for other PFLA webinars, as we're hoping to continue this series through the summer. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.
I don't know.